to another edition of Inside Government. I'm Peter Gay. Over the next half hour, we will meet another candidate for the congressional seat in this area. We are joined by Jake Auchincloss. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Jake.
You did, and thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. First of all, I have to comment on the shirt. Are you a fisherman?
Not a fisherman, just someone who's enjoying the nice weather outside and wanted to feel like I was putting on something more for the summer.
Fantastic. For people who don't know, and I am one of them, who exactly is Jake Auchincloss? Where are you from originally?
Born and educated in Newton, Massachusetts. I am currently a city councilor in my hometown of Newton, formerly a Marine officer. I commanded Marines in Afghanistan and then in Panama. I've worked in business for 4 years at a startup and a Fortune 100, and I've also worked as the director of a nonprofit. So I've got experience across local government, military, business, and nonprofit.
Now, if you say Newton, assuming you went to one of the public schools, are you a lion or a tiger?
I'm a proud tiger, graduated from Newton North in 2006. And my wife and I, now with a 1-month-old, our first child, are living right next to Cabot School, and we're looking forward to raising our family in Newton as well.
The military, talk about that for a second. What exactly was your role?
Yeah, so the Marine Corps really has a deep personal connection for me. My grandfather was the son of Russian refugees from the pogroms. He was in 1942 a poor Jewish kid in Chelsea, Massachusetts, and he walks into a Marine recruiting office, tries to sign up to go to the South Pacific, and they send him to college to study engineering. Totally changes his life and indirectly changes mine as well. And so I've always thought of the Marines with a very special fondness. And when I graduated from Harvard in 2010, we were in the middle of the surge to Afghanistan, and I felt like I owed something back to the service and to the country that had been so good to my own family. So I joined in 2010 as an infantry officer, commanded a platoon of Americans in Helmand province in 2012. We were patrolling through 3 Taliban-controlled villages. And then I came home and I joined the Special Operations branch of the Marine Corps and commanded a multinational special operations mission to Panama, working with Colombians and Panamanians to interdict drugs that were flowing up through South America.
Interesting background, that's for sure. Do you find your background comes into play? You're currently a city councilor in Newton.
Right.
Probably doesn't come into play that much in that role, but if you were to become a congressman?
So it's interesting. Being a Marine officer is very poor training for politics because as a Marine officer, people do what you command. It's a very hierarchical structure. As a politician, it doesn't work like that. You gotta collaborate. And that's really what I've made my name as in Newton, as someone who is a collaborative, results-oriented person. Over the last 6 years, rising to be the chair of the Transportation Committee and topping the ticket in my last re-election, I have made a name for myself as somebody who gets stuff done on transportation, on housing, on the environment, on immigration. And I do that by working together with fellow city councilors, with the mayor, and with neighbors. And there's really no better training ground for Washington, D.C. than local government, because local government fundamentally still works. It's fundamentally still focused on results, not ideology. And it is close to the people. When I'm out walking my dog, when I'm at the grocery store, I will hear from my constituents if I'm messing up. And that type of visceral connection, I think, is what we're missing with our representatives now in D.C.
I believe it was Tip O'Neill who said that
all politics is local. That's right, as it should be.
Let's talk about some of well, first of all, you mentioned you are a dad, son,
Teddy.
daughter, Teddy?
Teddy. He's a 1-month-old. He's happy and healthy. We gave birth at Brigham and Women's Hospital in April. And I just can't say enough about the professionalism of our healthcare workers, and what could have been a stressful time, frankly. Going to the hospital in the middle of the surge was really one of the moments that my wife and I will always look back on and cherish, because because of the nurses and the physicians and the staff throughout the hospital who made it such a great experience for us. And I'm thinking constantly of all these frontline healthcare workers. My own brother is a surgeon at Mass General Hospital. He was a captain of one of their rapid response teams for many weeks, had to quarantine from his own son in Boston. And it's just one example of the sacrifices that people throughout the state are making right now.
I meant to say a couple minutes ago when you were talking about your grandfather and so on, Auchincloss, I asked you before we started recording if that's a German name, because it sounds like it could be German. You said it's actually Scottish.
It's a Scottish name. Yeah, it's that's on my dad's side, obviously. And my dad's side is one that really imprinted on me a value for public service. My grandmother, I was fortunate enough to live very close to growing up, and I had dinner with her every Sunday night, and she would talk about how proud she was that her father had been one of the architects of the Marshall Plan under Harry Truman, that her brother had worked under Kennedy's administration as the National Security Advisor. She talked about politics and public service as something that she was proud of, that you should aspire to, that had dignity. Sounds almost quaint these days as we look at what's happening in DC, but it imprints itself on a young kid having dinner every week with his grandmother. And I've always thought about politics that way, as something that should be representative of the best amongst us, something that we should be proud to tell our kids that we've done.
And the other question I have to ask, because as soon as you said it, I thought to myself, okay, if someone's watching this, and North Attleboro is a conservative town, I don't know if you know a lot about North Attleboro, but former Speaker Joseph Martin was from North Attleboro. He and his brother, I believe, owned the town newspaper. There's a school named after him, Martin School, and everyone's proud of their conservative heritage. When I heard the name Teddy mentioned, a Democrat running for Congress, I had to ask you, is he named after Teddy Kennedy?
So I'm going to, as a Democrat running for office, I got to be careful here, but I'll admit he's actually named after Teddy Roosevelt, who I've always loved. He was a president who got stuff done, who was focused on results, who was fierce in his advocacy for the issues that he cared about while still being pragmatic, and whose legacy includes the national parks. It includes a strong foreign policy of the 20th century, and includes advocacy and more rights for working families.
If you make it through the September 1st primary, you may want to use that to get people to cross the aisle when they vote, because I'm sure they're going to be thinking Teddy Kennedy. Oh, Teddy Kennedy, another Massachusetts. Anyway, some of the issues you had mentioned earlier, transportation. Betty Poirier is the state representative representing North Attleboro, one precinct in Attleboro, and a portion of Mansfield as well. I was talking to her last week. She went up to the State House the day before, and she was so excited. The commute only took 43 minutes. She said normally it takes 2 to 3 hours from North Attleboro to the State House, which to me is absolutely asinine. Transportation. What can Congress do that they're currently not doing? And what could you do as our congressman to help with transportation in the state?
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago now, but there was a time when the streets were clogged with traffic, right? And transportation and traffic was one of our biggest concerns as a state, and I would argue actually a top 2 concern in the state. It was a major constraint on our economic growth, and it was also exacerbating economic inequality. It was a key reason why commutes were so devilishly hard, both for people living in marginalized communities, even close to Boston, but also for those folks living relatively farther away from Boston, as like North Attleboro. And I'm proud to say that my campaign is the only campaign at this point to have put forward a comprehensive position plan on transportation, and it links it to the environment. Now, I come to transportation with deep experience both in the public sector and the private sector. I'm the chair of the Transportation Committee in Newton, which has significant challenges with both public and vehicular transportation. And I was a manager at Liberty Mutual's Innovation Lab for a number of years, helping a Fortune 100 company think about the future of transportation. So I've seen this complicated issue from a number of different perspectives. What I've put forward is a plan to use federal funding to reinvent transportation in Massachusetts, and to do so both to improve quality of life and commutes and also to improve the environment. Transportation in Massachusetts accounts for 40% of the carbon emissions that drive climate change. It's the only sector that's growing. So to the extent that the federal government is going to make significant investments towards carbon neutrality, it needs to be making significant investments towards transportation. And I'll be a champion for that point in Congress. We're bringing home those funds to put in place all electric regional rail, as was called for by the MBTA, with 15-minute headways throughout the state and more stops. Connected bus rapid transit, better infrastructure for cycling and walking. These are measures that we know have worked elsewhere, both in American cities and European and Asian ones. We know what works, but we need the political willpower and we need the partnership between the federal, state, and local actors to get it done.
Natural question is, okay, sounds great. How do we pay for it?
There's a number of revenue streams, and to be candid, we've got to rethink some of it in light of COVID, because in times of crisis, you've got to reprioritize where the money goes. And so I think in the near term, some of these revenue streams now need to be redirected towards helping working families recover from this, because people are really in pain right now. And if they're food insecure, as a third of Massachusetts is, then a commute is secondary importance. So we've got to prioritize. Having said that, I think the main revenue stream needs to come from a carbon tax. There are 7 bills in the House of Representatives right now that feature some type of carbon fee per metric ton. They range in price, and they range in how they scale up, and they range in a number of different features. I could find myself supporting a number of them or a compromise between them. But the point is that we need to make the cost of carbon reflect what it costs society. And then we need to use those carbon revenues both to invest in infrastructure and to pay out dividends to families across the United States.
Granted, government is different in Canada than it is in the United States, but after a recent mass shooting in Canada, within a matter of days, if not weeks, there was a ban on assault weapons. We've seen too many mass shootings here in this country: Connecticut, Florida, Nevada, and it's to the point, Jake, that when I turn on the news or I pick up a newspaper and I read or see on television there was a mass shooting, it doesn't impact me anymore. Because, oh, okay, well, good. I'm glad it wasn't here. You are a Marine officer. You know the importance of, protection. When I see the people in these state houses armed with these weapons that you probably were issued when you were in the Marines, I saw it as an intimidation factor or tactic. I mean, how do we curtail gun violence without limiting people's rights as an American?
Well, I slept 8, trained, patrolled with an AR-15 for 4.5 years. No civilian, I don't think, has the constitutional right to own an assault weapon. And I'm proud of Massachusetts for having probably the strongest gun safety laws in the country. I'm also proud that we as a campaign have put forward a really comprehensive gun safety plan. It's got a number of features. A couple that I'll call out are universal background checks, red flag laws, so that if someone's mentally ill, their friends or family can make that known to the authorities, and taking guns out of the hands of domestic abusers. It also calls for mandatory liability insurance for personal firearms. If you're a responsible gun owner, then your insurance would be relatively low. But if you're somebody who poses a risk, the insurance would be relatively high. That's a policy that is getting increasing amounts of traction throughout the country, and I think could be a good step forward, one that might even unite both moderates and more progressive Democrats.
To make wholesale changes, however, you are going to have to convince your fellow congressmen and women from the so-called red states. We're a blue state, so-called red states. to take a stand that chances are many of the people in their state don't support.
Well, I don't necessarily agree that the members of their state don't support it. If you look at the polling on what I just described, universal background checks, red flag laws, even assault weapon buybacks, they actually command support from 70–80% of Americans, including in red states. However, your basic point is well taken. I don't think that with Mitch McConnell as the Senate Majority Leader, we're going to pass comprehensive gun safety legislation in this country. I don't think I would be being candid with my potential constituents if I said otherwise. He's made it very clear he doesn't want to do that. So there are some issues where compromise is possible and where it's welcome. I think about infrastructure and tax policy and energy policy and foreign policy issues where I think there are some areas of overlap between moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats. But then there are issues where we're just going to disagree, and that's okay. And one side's going to have to just win out. And I think guns is an example of that.
Let me read some of the items that were mailed to me by some members of your staff. You were the first candidate to collect the required signatures to get on the September 1st ballot. Jake has led fundraising in the race thus far. We all know how important money is in trying to run a campaign. And it brings me back to the issue we were just talking about. Lobbyists, the NRA, in their influence up on Capitol Hill. With fundraising being so important, how do you decrease the influence lobbyists have?
Well, our fundraising success has been based on individual contributions. I don't take corporate PAC money at all. And I don't take PAC money, or I don't take money, excuse me, from industry pressure groups that have anything to do with issues I'd be voting on. So I'm proud that we've led the field in fundraising, because to me it represents that I've been able to garner support from a wide swath of Massachusetts residents. There's no question that the American political system is dogged by the influence of money, and I've actually put forward at a conference in Detroit a system of public matching funds that would take some of the punch out of money in politics. But in addition to getting rid of Citizens United, which is, I think, a bad law, or a bad ruling, excuse me, by the Supreme Court, and one that probably needs a constitutional amendment to truly overturn, I think we also got to explore our actual electoral system. So I'm a supporter of ranked choice voting, for example. Ranked choice voting is one that would encourage candidates for office to appeal to the median voter, the center voter, as opposed to the extreme voters within each primary. It would also disincentivize candidates to be attacking one another, because you're trying to get second and third place votes from the electorate. So that type of structural reform is something that I've been an advocate for years, and I think would be a good complement to electoral finance reform as well.
You have been endorsed by more than 40 elected officials and community leaders. To the best of your knowledge, any down in this neck of the woods?
Well, I'm proud to say that Adam Scanlon has endorsed me. Adam and I have had a number of good conversations over the last 6 months. The most important thing to me is to be a partner and a listener as a member of Congress. The Massachusetts 4th is a tremendously diverse district, and it can't be treated as a monolith, and it can't be treated in blocks. The needs of North Attleboro are different than the needs of Attleboro, or different than the needs of Taunton and Fall River and Franklin and Sharon and Newton and Brookline. And I'm committed to setting up different regional kitchen cabinets so that I can keep my ear to the ground and I can understand what do they need to be successful. I've had hundreds of conversations throughout the district, and I can tell you that at no point has anybody said, hey, Jake, you know what we need? We need you to come get elected to Congress and then tell us what to do. I don't hear that. What I hear is, hey, Jake, we need you to be a partner. We need you to help on waste management in Fall River, or public safety, or economic development in Taunton, or COVID relief in North Attleboro. And that's what I intend to do, and that's why I think Adam has endorsed me.
Let's get into COVID-19. Let me start by asking you what, if anything, could have and should have been done differently?
That's give me a real softball question, huh?
Yeah.
So we were about 8 weeks behind the response. This, and that's, putting aside the fact that this president dismantled the pandemic preparedness unit years ago because it was created by Obama and therefore had to be bad, right? This administration first denied that we had a problem. Then it said it was a hoax. And then it put Jared Kushner in charge. And all three things have been a failure. We need about an order of magnitude more testing. And then we need the complement to testing, which is robust contact tracing. That is how we safely reopen this economy. We need to make sure we understand who has it, who's positive, who has had it before. And then we need to make sure that those who have come in contact with those who are infectious are notified and can self-isolate or can be isolated at a centralized facility. If we do those things, we can get a lot of people back to work without exposing people to higher rates of infection or death. Once we are able to do that, and that, again, like I said, we are about 8 to 10 weeks behind the response on that, due in large part to this administration's laggard response. Then we need to focus on this unemployment rate. Unemployment rate in Massachusetts is north of 20% at this point. I don't think we are in for a V-shaped recovery, unfortunately. I think this is going to be a years-long effort. And there are a number of ways that we can recover. I think one very promising one is to reinvest in manufacturing, and particularly life sciences manufacturing. In the nadir of our Great Recession, Governor Patrick called for the Mass Life Sciences Initiative, which doubled down on our strengths in life sciences to create a $1 billion public-private partnership that would create jobs and create prosperity. And it worked. We need to do it again, but we need to do it on a much bigger scale, and we need to do it in a way that's more equitable. Not just Boston and Cambridge should be thriving, but our gateway cities throughout Massachusetts as well. And life sciences manufacturing is a huge opportunity and a logical next step for us. That means cell and gene therapies. That means small scale continuous manufacturing. That means manufacturing of antibiotics. There's a tremendous amount of potential in this field, but it is going to require cooperation between federal, state, and local actors, and between the academy, business, and unions.
I don't know how you're going to take this, so don't be offended. Has anyone ever told you that you look a little like Jared Kushner?
Unfortunately, yes. And to be honest with you, I think it's kind of a liability. I don't personally think I look like him, but I get that everybody no one likes to be told they look like somebody else. I don't take it as a compliment.
You certainly have the military background, so I might be preaching to the choir here. And I've said this to many people. I've mentioned this in my newspaper column. Anyone I've ever spoken to with a military background has told me that you learn to prepare for worst case scenario. Hopefully, you never have to adopt those plans, but you prepare for worst case scenario. When information was being provided as early as December, certainly the beginning of January, the end of January, about the potential impact of this coronavirus pandemic, I have to believe at some point the Joint Chiefs of Staff said to the White House, said to the Senate, said to the House, look, worst case scenario, we don't have enough PPE. We don't have enough ventilators. We need to do this. And whether it was Donald Trump, whether it was the Senate, whether it was the House, ignored that advice. Am I wrong?
No, I think it's quite clear that I think it was actually more public health officials than it was national security officials who were sounding the alarm as early as December and January. Tony Fauci certainly was. And as the word that you said was prepare. We had the pandemic preparedness unit of the National Security Council. We had a group of experts at the highest levels of government whose only job was to prepare for this. And it was disbanded a couple of years ago because it was a legacy of the Obama administration. And we're now reaping the results of that.
Do you think Governor Baker, who is a Republican, but certainly not an ally of the president. Do you think he's done a good job here in Massachusetts?
Yes, I do. I think Governor Baker has done a good job. I think Marty Walsh in Boston has done a good job. I think in general, state and local leaders and business leaders as well have represented some of the collaboration, the decisiveness, the humanity and compassion that we are looking for in times of crisis. Nobody's going to make perfect decisions, of course. And as a member of Congress, I'm going to disagree with the governor on issues all the time, but I'm also going to maintain a two-way dialogue with him and be a partner with him to make Massachusetts a better place to live, because that's what people want out of their elected officials. They're tired of the name calling. They want results.
Last question, and this is a selfish question. No secret that cable access corporations like North TV, you have New TV in Norton, they're under attack, and that attack is revenue. As people cut the cord, get rid of cable, stream their television programming, we're about to lose a good chunk. Same applies to local newspapers as well.
Yes.
Is there anything, and should the federal government be doing anything to protect local news outlets like cable access and local newspapers?
So I feel acutely what you're describing. Here in Newton, we've really lost our local news coverage, and it's to the detriment of our city. And I've tried to step up and fill some of the gap with a monthly newsletter that I write, and it has now gotten close to 9,000 subscribers. And I try really hard to keep citizens informed about what's happening in day-to-day affairs. I am a little bit concerned whenever I think about the federal government funding media. I really want there to be a pretty strong independent watchdog over government at all levels, and I worry that with money comes strings attached. So I would prefer to see the renaissance of local, both TV and news, happen from more of a civic and private sector resurgence. I know that's a complicated issue. I don't claim to have all the answers for how to do it, but I do think that as a member of Congress, I can be a convener and I can be someone who can help get the right people in the room to work on the problem.
Some states have looked into, and I might have even passed, the reason cable access corporations get a % of the cable bill is the cable lines are spread throughout the municipality on poles on city or town streets. The same applies to broadband as well, and some states have headed in that direction so that there's not a significant loss. Would you support that?
That's an interesting idea. I have heard about it just in the last 10 seconds from you, so I need to do my homework on it, but it's certainly something I would look at, and I think it's an interesting idea.
All right, in 1 minute or less, here's the challenge. I believe there's 10 candidates running on the Democratic side, one on the Republican side. She's very lucky because she doesn't have to work as hard, at least until after September. Why should a Democrat or an independent or an unenrolled voter cast their ballot for you?
Well, at a time when Americans are looking for competence and reassurance from the federal government, I'm going to be a member of Congress who's focused on results, not revolution. In the military, in business, in nonprofits, and local government, I have worked together with people of varying backgrounds and opinions to get stuff done. And now more than ever, we need Washington, D.C. to work again. That's my commitment.
Well, Jake, best of luck on September 1st. Hope to talk to you again between now and then.
Likewise, I appreciate your time.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning into this edition of Inside Government. All right, Jake, very impressed, very impressed.
I appreciate it. That was fun.
Yeah, it was.
When does this air?
This airs for the first time next Friday. So that would be Friday the 15th. And then it will air for a solid month. The way I set the program schedule is week number 1, it airs in heavy rotation. Week number 2, it airs 25% less. Week number 3, 50% less. Week number 4, 75% less. when we first started doing this in 2006, we would record a program like this. It wouldn't be over a video conference, but we'd air it once, 1 week, excuse me, for 1 week only. And then I had people say, gee, when is that show going to be on again? We were on vacation last week. And it's like, we've got 24 hours a day to fill, 7 days a week, 3 channels. There's no reason why we can't repeat it for a number of weeks.
I agree.
And if you want, I can email, did you say Yael? Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, it's actually a her. It's YAEL at jakeauchincloss.com.
Okay. I can send her a link if you would like that. And we'll also use a portion of this on our news tomorrow night.
Great.
So I'll send a link to that as well.
Peter, thanks so much. This was fun.
Thank you.